Hey friends, this is Karen from Blue Rooster Farm, and today we are going to be working up these apples. So if you want to see what we're going to be doing with them, stick around. Thanks for sticking around. Well, we have a ton of apples right now. And if you watched my last video that I put out, I was preserving them by drying them, and also we made applesauce and canned it. But we still have tons more apples. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to make apple pie filling. And then we're also going to just can quarts of apples in a simple syrup. That way we can preserve quite a few of these apples. And I've got more out in the mudroom and get them on our shelves. We will still be doing lots more drying of the apples because we go through the dried apples pretty quickly. They're a snack that we enjoy. So I'm going to get busy and I'm going to start peeling and slicing and chopping these apples. Now, I'm planning on using my KitchenAid mixer with the peeler slicer attachment. And I am going to be actually just using the peeler portion of it because for my apple pie filling and my canned apples, I like to have different size chunks. I don't like to have those thin slices. So I'm going to make different sizes and I'll show you when we come back after they're all chopped up and sliced. If you don't have a KitchenAid attachment, you might have one of the hand cranked apple peeler slicers. And if you want, you can change this so that it only peels. You don't have to have the slicer on it. This thing at the end comes off. So you might look into that if you are wanting to also make different size apples. And of course, if you don't have either, just get you a paring knife and get peeling and slicing. And that's what I used to do all the time. And it gets you a good movie, something that you can watch and do it, and it'll go by fast. So I'm going to get started and I will be right back and we'll get busy cooking up these apples. All right, we are back, and it's only been a second for you, but it's been a couple hours for me. It's a Saturday, it's beautiful outside, we're toward the end of October. We finally got rain the night before last, and we got 0.6 inches, which is less than an inch, but we will take it. Of course, our garden is done, but you worry about the perennials, the trees, the things that are going to have to make it through the winter. So we're hoping that we can get some more rains before we start getting the cold weather. So what I've done is I went through and I peeled all the apples and then I hand quartered them for our canned apples. So these are just quartered. I cut them in half and then cut them again, took the core out. And we're going to be putting these in jars and just having them as canned apples. I'm going to set these aside because we're going to focus first on our pie filling. And with the pie filling, I ended up cubing it. And I like cubed pie filling for apples better. And whether or not it's considered safe, I don't know. So you look into it if you are very strict on the way you can and want to make sure it's all tested. I've done it for many, many years this way now, and I just like it better. I make pastries and things with this filling and also little hand pies, and it just fits in there better. I don't like the thin sliced apples that you get when you use the apple slicer peeler. It just is too thin. I like to have a little bit of apple meat in it, and these cubes work just fine. So do this at your own risk. It works for me. So what I've done is I've got this, and I've been setting them in citric acid water so they're not browning, and they've done really good like this. Now what I need to do, the first thing I need to do is I need to blanch this fruit. And by blanching, I mean I need to take it in portions and put it in hot water, boiling water, and let it boil for 1 minute. Once it comes back to a boil, start timing 1 minute to blanch it. And what this is going to do is it's going to take a lot of the air out of the apples. It's also going to kill a lot of the bacteria. But, you know, I feel like when you're doing the pie filling, you're already heating it up. And I especially keep it on there to make sure that it is thickened well and the clear gel is real clear in the product. But this is the recommended way. I do think that if you skip this step of heating the apples, you might have more problems with siphoning. So it will get the air out of the apples, it will get them hot all the way through, and it will get them ready to go in the pie filling. So we're going to do that first. I've already got my other ingredients measured out and ready to go because I want to get this done as quickly as possible. Sometimes these little steps make it take a little bit longer. I'm going to bring you over to the stovetop and I'll show you what I mean by blanching the apples, and then I'll get it all done and we'll start making the filling. All right, so I've got my apples and they're still in some liquid, and I've got my water over here and it is boiling. And you want to start off with boiling water. And I've got about a gallon or so in here. And what you're going to do is you're going to take about 6 cups of apples. And that's a little less than a third. I'm going to probably try to do it in thirds. So you're going to drop, I'm straining it off. You're going to drop your apples into that boiling water. You're going to let it come back to a boil. As soon as it's back to a boil, what we're going to do is we are going to start timing for 1 minute. I'm going to put the lid on to get it hot quicker. Okay, it looks like they're back up to a boil, so I'm going to put the lid on and put the timer on for 1 minute. And there's our timer. So we are going to get these out and just let them drip off their liquid. And I'm putting them into another big bowl. And I am going to put a cover on top of it. And I'm just going to set this in the oven. It's a cool day today. We have our windows open, but it's in the 60s. But the oven will stay a little warmer because I don't want them to get too cool. So those are in the oven. I'm ready for my next batch. I'll bring you back when we've got those all done. All right, I have my last batch of apples blanching right now, so we're going to try to get this done real quickly before those are done. And what I'm doing is I am following a recipe from the National Center for Food and Home and Food Preservation. And I'll leave the link at the bottom in the description box. So what we need is 6 quarts of blanched apples, and that's what I'm blanching right now. We're going to need 5½ cups of granulated sugar, and I've got that here. I'm going to go ahead and you'll need a really nice big pot. Now this is going to be 7 quarts. And they also have the recipe for 1 quart. So if you wanted to make 4 quarts, you would just multiply that 1 quart by 4, everything by 4. And you could do that too. But I'm going to go ahead and I want to get a steam canner or a water bath canner full. My steam canner can handle 7 quart jars at one time. So we've got our 5½ cups of sugar. We need 1½ cups of clear gel. Now, clear gel is a modified food starch that is recommended for canning. They do not recommend plain cornstarch or flour. So I have right here 1.5 cups of clear gel. Now I'm going to put this in, but then I'm going to mix it up with the sugar because I want it to dissolve nicely. I want it to make sure there's no clumps of it. And putting it with a little bit of sugar and mixing it up works the best. And so there we go. Whew. So we've got those mixed together. Now we also need, it calls for 1 tablespoon of cinnamon, and then you can add a teaspoon of nutmeg as well if you like. I'm adding a tablespoon of cinnamon and about 2 teaspoons of apple pie spice. So that's just what we prefer. Now you can taste the filling when it's just about done and see if you like it. If you need to add more, you could add more at that time. That would be fine. So we'll just mix that in as well. Now I also like to add a pinch of salt. It's not in the recipe, but I think it brings out the flavor a little more. So I'll do that once I get over to the stove. Whew. And then we are going to take 2.5 cups of cold water. And you want it to be cold so your clear gel doesn't start clumping. And we're going to take 5 cups, make sure I'm right, 5 cups of apple juice. And this is the apple juice that I made when I was using my Instapot to make the applesauce. I had juice left. And I've made several batches now, and so we drink it, and it's really good. Okay, so I'm going to mix all of this up. And we are going to be adding lemon juice, but that won't be added until a little bit later. And the lemon juice is 3/4 cup. But that is once it has thickened. So I am going to bring this now over, and I've got actually some sugar lumps. I was putting some sugar into my sugar jars, or my sugar jar container, and I noticed my bucket had some big sugar lumps, so we'll get those out. Okay, and so now you just kind of have a brown slurry, but it smells really good. So I'm going to bring this over to the stove. I'm going to get my apples off, and I'll meet you back over there. I have it on the stove, just set it on the stove. You want to make sure that you don't have any cornstarch in the corners of your pan. Everything is dissolved well. Once this starts thickening, you need to be really careful about keeping it stirred and off the bottom of your pan. You don't want to scorch it. So I've got it right now on a medium, and we're going to see if we can get this up to a boil, and it will end up being a translucent brown liquid. If you did not have the cinnamon and stuff, it would be a pretty clear liquid. And while I'm stirring that, I wanted to mention to you that I found a very neat article, and it's called Preserving Apples, and it's by the Illinois Extension. And it talks about here, I don't know if you can see that, about the different kinds of apples and what they're best used for. It also gives you approximately how many apples in a bushel, a pound, things like that, that when you're reading recipes to help preserve apples, you're never sure how many you have. It talks about ways to prevent browning. Um, just a lot of really good information on preserving apples. It talks about cooking them, canning them, making applesauce, freezing them, drying them, and then it gives a whole bunch of recipes and things for preservation. And there's some of them sounded quite good. There was a harvest time apple relish that sounded good. Of course, apple butter, apple chutney, peach apple salsa. And all of these are considered safe and tested recipes. Let's see. And then there's questions that people have asked that might be something that you're also wanting to ask and the answers there. So I'm going to put a link below for this PDF, and you might find it interesting and helpful too. Now, the apples that we're using are Suncrisp apples, and it's not a real popular apple, but we had tasted this apple many years ago at a local orchard and just really liked it because it has kind of a tart taste and also a sweet taste. This year, I don't think our apples tasted as good as usual. We had number one, we had a really dry fall and we had apples starting to drop early. We also had a tree that was overwhelmed with apples, and we did not get a chance to thin it out this year again. And so it had tons of apples. Um, this tree usually only bears every other year, so it won't be bearing next year after this year of so many apples. But we will give it a good pruning, and it will be ready to perform again in 2 years. But we really like the apples this year, like I said, because they were dropping earlier and because of the dry weather, they hadn't tasted as good. Now, I did notice that after the first frost, after I went out and realized they really didn't get frosted, we'd already picked a bunch of them, and then after the frost, we went out a couple days later, and it wasn't a very hard frost at all. In fact, our tomatoes and peppers are still alive at this point. But I think that sweetened them up because after that, we tasted them and they did taste sweeter. So whether that's just our imagination or if that's the way it is, I'm not sure. But we have several different varieties planted. Some of them haven't started bearing yet, but right now we have two that bear a lot of fruit. And so we've enjoyed having both of them. Probably next year those two trees won't produce, but hopefully our new trees will start putting more on and we'll have some. So a lot of times when I'm preserving apples, I'm thinking, okay, we probably won't have any next year, so I need to preserve enough to get through a couple of years. And they do last well on the shelf. In fact, I do have some canned apples that were put up in 21 or 22. I can't remember which, and they look just fine. So we will preserve them and use them. So as you see, I've just been stirring this as we've gone along. I am going to keep stirring it. I increased the heat because I am kind of wanting it to get going. It's going to start getting thick and I'm going to have to turn it down, but I've increased the heat to a medium high, and so hopefully we'll get this thickened here real soon. Now this is going to get quite thick, and especially once you add your apples, you're going to get a workout with the stirring. So just be ready for that. Now, I watched several people on YouTube do apples, and a lot of people talk about how their apples have a problem with siphoning. And a lot of it has to do with getting your apples heated all the way through, with that blanching. And then the clear gel continues to expand once it's in the jar. And so I have found that cooking this until it is translucent, not cloudy, with giving more than the recommended headspace, just a little bit more, makes my pie fillings come out a lot better without as much siphoning. Now, sometimes they still siphon, but not nearly as much. I know when I first was making pie filling, there would be quite a bit of siphoning, and the jar sides would have the pie filling down the side. But anymore, it's just a little bit that runs down the side. Now, watch me say that, and today we'll have a whole bunch of siphoning, but we'll just see. We'll just see. So this is getting hot, and hopefully it'll start thickening up real soon here. And I did want to add just a pinch of salt to that. And I think I'm also going to add just a little bit of vanilla, but I'm going to wait until this thickens up. Vanilla is not on the recipe. It's a flavoring, but it's not enough to change the recipe any. And I think it tastes really good in apple pie fillings. Okay, it's starting to thicken up on the bottom. I have changed my spoon into this wooden spoon spatula, and that is because the bottom can scrape the straight edge scrapes the bottom of the pan a lot better, because you don't want that to be sticking. My heat is now at a medium again. And everybody's stovetop is different, so whatever works for your stovetop, but just don't let it scorch. So at this point, you can see we're getting a thickened sauce at the bottom, and it's becoming a little translucent down there. We just need to keep stirring. And like I said, it's going to be thick. When we add the apples, that will help thin it out just a little bit, because the apples do have their juice, and they'll let out more juice as they heat up again. And you can see it's starting to bubble, and it's becoming a clearer brown, which is just what we're looking for. I'm going to go ahead and add our lemon juice now, but I'm going to keep stirring. Now this will cool it off a little bit, so we need to bring it back up to heat. And I'm switching my arms. And I also want to add my vanilla, again, probably a tablespoon or so. And that's optional. That's just what I like to add. Now, this is just about ready. What you want to do is you want to already have your jars and things ready to go, because as soon as this is ready, you don't want it to cool down while you're getting your jars ready. You want to make sure that everything is ready to go, because this is a thick product, and it's going to require a lot of heat to penetrate all the way through to the center. And so we want it to be as hot as it can be in the center already. So we've got this. I'm just going to turn it on low while I'm scooping my apples in. And these are still hot. They're still steaming. Now, I was a little generous with my apples because I wanted to make sure I had 7 quarts. And if I have any leftovers, I'm good, because I can make something with that without canning it. Doesn't that look good? And I'm not going to put that little bit of water in there, because I think there's going to be enough juice come off of these that we don't want to thin down our gel too much. Okay, so now I'm going to get a big spoon again. I still have it on low. Now, according to the recipe, you can just go ahead as soon as it's blended in, get it right in the jars. But I like to heat it just a little bit longer. Not much, but just a little bit longer. I want to make sure everything is heated really well through. All right. I think we are good. That is really yummy. Really yummy. And again, it all depends on your apples too. If you are using a softer apple, it's going to disintegrate and fall apart. So if you look at that PDF download that I shared with you, you can find out if the apples that you're going to be wanting to use are a good choice. But you want something that's a firm enough apple that can withstand all of this. So my heat's going off, and I'm going to bring my camera over, and I've got everything set up, and we'll dish this up. Okay, we've got to get this canned up right away. And so I've got my quart-sized jars. They don't need to be sterilized, just clean. We're going to be processing for more than 10 minutes. For quarts and pints, this is 25 minutes. If you do not have your steam canner going, this is the time to get it going. Your hot water bath should have been going when you were getting your apple pie filling thickened, because it takes a lot longer to get all of that water boiling. This is going to be really hot, so you want to be sure you put it in to a hot water bath, and it not boiling, just a hot water bath, and a hot steam canner. So we are going to fill this up to, it recommends 1 inch headspace. I'm going to go just a little bit lower. Whoops, and I'm just throwing this all over the place. So I'm gonna set that one aside. And it's very thick, which is what we want. If it's thin, it's not going to be thick enough for a pie. And we will be debubbling because this is very thick and it's easy to get lots of air bubbles in there. And this is just really pretty and it smells so good. It's a nice fall day today and we have some yummy smelling apple pie filling the air. What a great day. Okay, well, it's a good thing I was very generous with my apples because it looks like I'm just going to have enough for these 7 quarts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take my skewer here, and it's just a wooden skewer, and you can have a debubbler or whatever you have. A knife works, but you just have to be careful not to hit the sides of your jar and break your jar. And I am just going around and through trying to make sure there are no bubbles. And then a lot of times I will do this and just make sure. And need just a few more there. And so an inch is at the bottom of the bands, and I go just to the shoulders. So an inch is to the band here at the bottom, and I am just right at the shoulders. So just a little bit less or a little bit more than an inch headspace. So I'm going to get these all filled up and I can fast forward it right here. Okay, got them all filled, and I maybe have a tablespoon of apples and stuff in there. And I've got about a tablespoon here too. So I'm going to get this cleaned up real quick and wash my hands, and we're going to get the rims cleaned and the lids on. I kind of got sticky here. Okay, so what I've got now is my vinegar and a paper towel. And apple pie filling is very sticky and glumpy, so you really need to make sure you clean your rims very carefully. And always check your rims to see if you have any nicks or chips. And My canner is all ready to go over there. I hear it starting to steam. And if you don't have a steam canner and you still water bath, you need to check out steam canners. So much easier. Really like mine. Don't have to use all that water. Don't have to waste the time heating it up. Just really nice and easy. Okay, now we'll put the lids on. And the rings, fingertip tight. And sometimes I back it off and do it again if I don't feel like it went down right. All right, these are ready to go into the steamer for 25 minutes. Now on my steamer, I have to wait till it gets to a certain temperature. And then once it's at that temperature for my elevation, then I will start the timer. And then after it's done with the processing time, 25 minutes, I will turn the heat off and I will just let the pan with all the jars in it set without taking off the lid. And I'll let that set for 10 minutes. Then after 10 minutes, I'll open it up and then move the jars to a counter that's covered in a towel or a mat. And then we won't touch those until the next day. Now, my jars right now, one thing about a steam canner is you don't get your jars washed off as much as in a water bath. And my jars are kind of sticky right now, so I might wipe them down just a little bit so I can tell if they do have a problem with leaking. And I'll bring you back when they come out of the canner. And then we'll start making our canned apples. That is our apple pie filling. Doesn't that look good? Okay, I'm going to put them all on the counter and then I'll show a picture. All right, there they are. Now, the only two that we had siphoning would be this one and this one. And this is really interesting. I've never had siphoning occur up here. So I'm going to watch that one. That one may not seal. Now, if it does siphon, it's still a good chance it's going to seal. Don't think just because it's siphoned, it's not going to seal, depending on the pressure that helps it pull back in. So I'll keep my eyes on those two. But the others look great, and those will be wonderful to have on the shelf. So next, we're going to be canning apples, so stick around. It is now evening. After the pie filling was put on the canner, I decided to get everything cleaned up, got some dinner on the table, finished the laundry, and we finished dinner. It's dark outside now, and so now I'm going to go ahead and get the apples canned. Now, canning apples is really easy, and so this isn't going to take any time at all. I've already done the hard part, which was the peeling. So what I've got here is a pan with some water, and I ended up using the water that we were blanching the apples in because that had a lot of good flavor from the apples that we were using for our pie filling. So I just measured that water out, and I'm making 2 batches. And the recipe I'm using comes from the Ball Home Preservation Guide here. And I know all of the Ball Blue Books have it too. And it's just apples and syrup. So anytime you're canning a fruit in a syrup, you can decide how sweet you'd like that liquid to be. And in the book, they have all the different types of syrups. And this is, like I said, also in the Ball Blue Book. You can have an ultra light, you can have an extra light, you can have a light, medium, heavy. You can can it in corn syrup or using corn syrup or using honey, I guess is what that is, instead of sugar. You can also can fruit in just water. The sugar actually helps preserve it a little bit. So I always use a little bit of sugar, but I don't like to put much sugar in the liquid. And you can also preserve them in an apple juice, and that's why I decided to go ahead and keep that water and measure it out to use for our apples. I am doubling the recipe. I'm not sure how much for sure we'll need. If I end up needing more, I'll just fill the tops of the jars with water. Um, that's fine. So what I've got here, I'm going to use the extra light syrup. And for every 5.5 cups of water, you're going to use 1 1/4 cup of sugar. So I've got 11 cups of water here, so I'm using 2.5 cups of sugar. And all we're doing is just putting that in there. And then we're going to mix it, and I'm going to put it on the burner, and I'm going to bring it to a boil. And once it's to a boil, just make sure it's all dissolved. Then I'm going to be adding the fruit. And what we're going to do is just add the fruit. We're going to bring it back to a boil. And I believe we boil it for about 5 minutes. Let me check here. Yeah, boil gently for 5 minutes. And after that, we are just going to can it up. But I'm going to get this boiling. I'm going to move the camera over there, and then I'll show you how we do it. All right, so our syrup has come to a boil, and now we're just going to go ahead and add all of our apples. And again, I don't know, I just peeled a bunch of apples. I don't know how many this is going to make. I'm going to be putting it in quart-sized jars, so we'll just see what we get. And so far, it looks like I've got a good amount of syrup. And these apples did really well setting in the water with the citric acid that helped them. They stayed nice and light colored. They didn't brown much. So now we're just going to bring this back up to a boil, and then we're going to simmer these apples for 5 minutes. And I'm going to put the lid back on. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to get everything ready to can with. Again, if you're doing a water bath canner, you'll want to start getting your water boiling at this point or on. I won't need to set my steam canner for just a little bit. I'll turn it on when I take this off the burner because it'll be ready by the time I get all the apples into the jar. So these are going to cook and get nice and hot all the way through. And it's important to do this step. I know there's a lot of fruits and things that you could do cold packs with. And you might even do cold pack with your apples just because that's the way you learned how to do it. What I have found is that there's a lot of siphoning and you end up with a lot of liquid missing and your fruit is above the water level. And so this, getting the fruit hot, that air gets out of the fruit, it allows your jars to hold their water a little better. So we'll see how these look when we take them out of the canner and see if that's true. But we've got to get this to simmer all the way, or we've got to get this to boiling and then simmering for 5 minutes so that they're hot all the way through. And I'll bring you back when that's at that point. All right, we are getting close to the end. It's been a long day. Okay, so these have boiled for 5 minutes, or simmered, I should say, simmered gently for 5 minutes. And so what we're going to do is we are going to put the apples in first, and then we'll add the liquid at the end. And when you put the apples in, you want to make sure it's full, because what's going to happen is when this is being canned and processed, the apples are going to go to the top and float. If you don't have enough apples in there, you're going to have a large amount of liquid on the bottom and then your apples at the top. So we want to put as many as we can get in there. We certainly don't want to smash them, but we want to fill it in nice and I shouldn't say the word tight, nice and full. Okay, so let's get started. And I have a slotted spoon here, so it's just dropping those apples in. And like I said a while ago, I have no idea how many I'm going to get because I did not measure. I just peeled a bunch of apples, and when I was tired of doing it, I stopped. I still got lots of apples left. So we are getting quite a few apples into a jar. And then I'm going to stop right there, and we'll get some more into this jar. While I'm putting these in here, we're getting down to the very last part of my preservation from the garden. And so it's getting exciting. I love doing it, but it's nice when it's done, and we'll be able to enjoy all of the food that we put up. Because really during the summer we have all of that stuff in the garden and we don't need to open the cans of things. But now once the garden is done, now we'll get to start opening our cans and enjoying it. And I'm also looking forward to doing some videos with you on baking and cooking. And Thanksgiving's right around the corner. So I've got lots of good recipes for the holidays and for Thanksgiving that I would like to share with you. So it'll be nice to get the canning done. Now there is a couple of things I still want to do on canning. I do want to do some beef bone broth. And I'd like to get some, onion soup or French onion soup in some jars, because I need to use up our onions. Several of them are starting to sprout. I froze a whole bunch of them. I chopped them up and froze them, but I would like to go ahead. We have one variety I think that's a good store, and it's storing very nicely. But the sweet onions and things, they're starting to sprout. So I just need to get in there and either get something made with them or chop them up and freeze them. So that's something that I need to work on. But other than that, I think I am just about done. And today I posted on my Blue Rooster Facebook page the number of peppers I have left after our final haul. Because if you watched the final haul from our garden, you saw that we had a ton of peppers. And so I have been working on them for the last week and a half. And I just have a few jalapeno and a few green chili pie. And I think there was a few Marconi. I can't remember. There's one more that I have a few left, but very few compared to what I did have. So those will probably just be eating fresh. I have on the dehydrator right now. Both dehydrators are full of peppers. So I'll get those dried. And I think I'll do the red jalapenos, dry those too, because it takes quite a few peppers to make much powdered pepper or chili powder. Okay, it looks like I'm going to have four jars, and that's perfect. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my liquid and I am going to fill it up, the jars, and I believe it's 1/2 inch. Let me look. Half of an inch. We need a 1/2 inch headspace, so that will be fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this liquid in, then I'm going to come back and debubble, and then if we need to add more, we'll add more. And the apples themselves have let out a lot of juice after I put them in the jars. Let me hold one up for you. So you can see we have liquid up to there already because of the juice in the apples. Now, I remember when I was young, my grandmother Borgmeyer, she would always have canned apples. And after Sunday, well, I guess during Sunday lunch or Sunday dinner, we'd always seem to have canned apples. Sometimes I believe she also had pear or peaches, canned peaches, and they were always good. Again, I like to put mine in the refrigerator before I serve them because that makes them super good. And then we just eat them like you would peaches or pears or whatever, just a fruit with your meal. Now I've got a ton of juice left, and that's okay. I can make more apples because I've got lots more, and I'll just save this juice and add it to whenever I do more apples. Now, normally I use a wooden skewer, but I don't want to tear up my apples, so I just have a little spatula that fits down there nicely, and I'm going to use that as my debubbler. And lots of bubbles are coming up, so you want to make sure you debubble these. Lots of little nooks and crannies for those air pockets to hide. And then once I do this, I'll just top it off with whatever liquid is needed. To bring it to 1/2 inch headspace. And I'm going to give them just a little bit more because, like I said, apples have a tendency to expand quite a bit. So I think I'm going to give it just about an inch. And I know that's not following the guidelines, but I would rather it not siphon. And you can kind of take a look at your jars to make sure you don't see any bubbles around the edges. A lot of times they like to hide right on the shoulders because they just don't quite get up through there. And that should be perfect. Then we're going to take a paper towel and a little bit of vinegar and just clean off those rims nicely. And we have our lids right here. And I hear my steam canner just starting to boil. I can hear it simmering over there. Whoops. I'll get that in a minute. So we need to do fingertip tight on our rings. These are very hot. And this is going to go into my steam canner or a water bath canner for, did I say 20 minutes? It's for both pint and quart, 20 minutes. And so I'll bring you back when I take them out. Our apples all finished processing. They have just set for 10 minutes. And so now we're going to open it up. Ooh, it's very hot there. All right. So looking right now, it doesn't appear that there's siphoning, but because it is a clear liquid, we will just have to wait till they cool and see if the water level drops. So I'm going to, let's lift one up. So these are really pretty. Isn't that pretty? They all are distributed throughout. We don't have a big liquid space at the bottom. That looks perfect. I'm going to set these on a mat on the counter and then I'll show you what they look like. All right, there's what they look like. They look great. I'm real happy with those. And it looks like all of our apple pie filling sealed. So that's exciting. So even though we had that weird leak on the first one here, it is sealed. So I'll wait till tomorrow evening or the next day and I'll give these jars a good wash, take the bands off, and then I will put them on the pantry shelf. Thanks for watching my video. If you like what you see, please consider subscribing. It would really help my channel out a lot. Also, don't forget to like and share. And if you have any questions or comments, just leave them in the comments below. I love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great week.